You can address this complexity of interrelated challenges and issues on lots and lots of different levels. And I think one of the things that distinguishes Heartwood from a lot of other otherwise comparable efforts is the extent to which I think Heartwood acknowledges and tries to work within a somewhat deeper framework, which is the recognition that for each individual activist within the larger movement, within the larger community, the fundamental challenge is addressing the internal challenges of learning to understand who you are as a human being, what your role is within the larger planetary systems, within the human family, within the larger human community. And so with that in mind, taking care of the whole human being, the whole activist, and not just dealing with that part of the political and social sphere in which these decisions appear to be being made, is very, very important to recognizing that we live in a culture that is characterized by wounded people.
When you lose everything and you still have your life and you realize what you could have lost, going to work in the mines becomes a question of why in the hell am I still doing this? Why am I risking my life every day? I could have lost the kids. I could have lost me. What's the point in going to work in a place that just damages the body and it takes time away from your kids and takes time away from the important things in life. It really showed us that the small things in life are more important than a paycheck. And that kind of worked itself into working with environmental groups, because I saw the communities had eroded while I was working in the mines. I realized that the union was gone, that people weren't as much of a family anymore. And I started reaching out to the environmental organizations to see what they were doing, because I heard that they were doing community building, and I tried to work with them. So they helped me out a lot in realizing exactly what the coal industry was up to, more than what I had already kind of guessed. Because we always knew that the coal industry was out to make money, and it was never about to help coal miners. But whenever I started realizing just how much damage was being done, it really got us to thinking more about what we have to do for our children.
It's certainly true. Tom Fitzgerald said last night, he used the famous Margaret Mead quote about a small group of dedicated people can change the world, and as a matter of fact is probably the only way. And that's held pretty true. And there are certain things that certain individuals just, for some reason or another, don't want to live with. And you can't just stand back and do nothing when something that you can't live with is going on. And I think that's what was generally the motivating factor for these, because it was very interesting that these grassroots groups were forming local groups that were being impacted by what was happening on national forests in their vicinity, neighborhood, region, and we're all trying to do something at the same time, and realizing that maybe a larger network would be helpful in carrying that out. And I think that's how Heartwood, sort of the motivating factor. But locally here in Southern Illinois, it was people that were being impacted in their neighborhoods or in places that they used and enjoyed, that was motivating people to try to, what do you do? How can we stop this? And when you're dealing with governmental action like that, the way you stop it is you try to get as many people as you can to speak out. And so, locally, it's always really important. I mean, Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and there's a lot of truth in that. So, and there's not really enough of it. I mean, you know, what we still only get, you know, like a primary election in a non-presidential year, you only get 25-30% turnout, and that's of the registered voters. And how many of people that are eligible to vote are actually registered? You know, it's half or somewhere around that. There's still a lot of people out there that aren't even registered to vote. So you're talking about a very small minority of the people that are choosing our representatives in the government. And so even if, you know, there's certainly a lacking of people being involved in what's going on, and that's why so many bad things happen.
My paid job is to be an environmental educator, and sometimes I find as an environmental educator I end up spending time indoors for my job, and you know, that affects me too. I think it's important for people to be outside. I think it's important for people to establish a connection to nature, because you know, you have to know about something, I think, before you can really care about it. And especially in a city like Chicago, I think about like some of the children that grow up there. A lot of the children that grow up there in that really urban environment, they may have access to a backyard, but you know, a lot of the neighborhoods can be kind of dangerous. A lot of times parents don't want their kids to go out on the street and play, and for very good reasons, like because of that danger. And so I feel like in general, oh, and then there's also Chicago public schools. I know in Illinois, students are supposed to have recess every day, but in Chicago public schools, sometimes they're not given recess. There was one school that I worked with last year where they didn't have recess at all, which is just completely maddening, considering that a lot of these kids are in neighborhoods where their parents probably don't want them running outside, and so they're not really given the chance to even be outside or run around and play. And I feel like people, you know, kids and adults, need that.
Clearly, the isolation from the natural world and the opportunities to be distracted from it are more, you know, diverse and larger and more tempting now than ever, as well as more available. So that is a reality. I don't agree that that young people today are any less passionate, any less concerned. I was a high school teacher for 30 years, worked very, very closely on environmental and community issues with those students. It was a part of what we did as part of the school that I was a part of at that time. And I know that the process of connecting young people with the world and exposure to what's going on there is a huge piece of what it takes for them to become aware of it. And currently, many groups that Heartwood is directly and indirectly connected with that are, you know, putting together and combining resources and trainings for young people that have to do with energy issues and extraction issues and forest issues is amazing, and it's huge. And the passion and the energy that young people bring to it is something that those of us that have been with Heartwood for 25 years may no longer have in our own personal tool belts at our disposal. So we know that they will be stepping into the types of roles that have molded our lives, and we also know that the passion that has driven us to do this is going to be part of their lives, whether they have stumbled across it now or will do it later. And we have many young people that although you may not see a large concentration of them at an event like this, the circles that the people here work with are really amazing. If you would look at Heartwood as a circle and each of the people that are here today as being the center of another circle, you can see how broad this movement and this large family and community is.
You know, that's everything. That's the future. And that's one of the best things about Heartwood is Heartwood's managed to keep the young people coming. And it gives me really a lot of hope for the future, you know, that there's people coming on that are really concerned. You know, and Heartwood's forest councils are so fabulous. They're really fun, you know, great music and real creative, and so it's kind of hard to come, especially if it's far distance, but it's always worth it. You always kind of think, oh, it's so far, and all that, but they're always great, and I'm always glad that I came.
Overall, I think we all were sort of raised with schools jamming recycling down our throats and just sort of the basic environmentalism. I think a lot of people have trouble seeing what they can do beyond the sort of accessible things like recycling or adding their names onto petitions and sort of taking the next step in activism.
So Heartwood has expanded its areas of concern to include fracking, strip mining, mountaintop removal, things that occur on private property. And we still seek to educate people as our initial tactic, but education alone, we have found, isn't enough to protect either public or private land. Sometimes actions are required, and sometimes litigation is required. So we have a long-term strategy now, a multi-year strategy, that right now we're trying to train Forest Watch volunteers on all the forest in the 18 Heartwood states, train them to learn how to become involved whenever the Forest Service offers information about a proposal to do something on public land. And if we think that proposal is detrimental to the land and not serving the communities, then we're trying to train people through our Forest Watch program to know how to intervene, how to protect the land. Once we have accomplished that on the ground, which we hope to do within the next year or two, we look to move into a litigation phase of our strategy, which will involve making all the national forests east of the Mississippi River take climate change into account in any of their management decisions. Just like the national forests don't operate, they don't exist within a vacuum of private land. No place in this country goes without being affected by climate change. It's something that's affecting our entire planet. So we have a forest, carbon, and climate campaign to educate people about the effects of activities like logging and burning and spraying herbicides and drilling for oil and gas, what effect those have not just on the ground in the national forest and the adjacent private property, but also in the atmosphere. And that's where Heartwood is moving now, is trying to expand our range of effectiveness beyond just the national forest to take the whole planet into consideration.
And when people have been exposed to an inclusive decision-making process as opposed to a competitive decision-making process where 51% can impose their will on 49%, and usually that 51% actually only represents like 3 to 5% who've been able to distort the political process to make it look like they represent 51%, but they absolutely do not. What they are able to do is manipulate and distort the process so that people end up voting against their own self-interest to the extent that they're even allowed to vote or their votes are even counted. But it gives the patina, the appearance of a democratic process. But when you model a fundamental democratic process where people are sitting in a circle and they can come to an agreement, even when they may have come into that circle with differing opinions, then you understand what the true power of democracy is and what the true power of organizing and activism is that we humans have the right to make decisions in our own self-interest over the long term. So.